Okay, so at this point, we're going to make things a bit more difficult. There's a very, very subtle difference between this question and the other ones we've seen. And that is there's one extra word in there that makes things more complicated. Loads of people miss that word, okay, and therefore do the question like the other ones and therefore lose all of the marks for it. So you've got to be really careful that every single word in that question counts for something and you've got to look for it. The word in this question that we haven't seen appearing in any of the others is the squared. Okay, so A is directly proportional to B squared. As soon as you see words like that, you can have squaring or cubing or types of roots. You want to really take notice of it. And if you're someone who likes to highlight things in an exam, you might want to do that as well. But what I'm going to do is because I've got B squared, I'm not going to be working with B. I'm always going to be working with B squared. So I'm just writing that there to remind myself I've got B squared in everything as I'm working. So I'm going to do the question in basically exactly the same way, except I'm always writing B squared, which means I'm going to have to be doing a bit of squaring sometimes as well thrown in. So A is directly proportional to B squared. Let's write a proportionality statement. A is directly proportional to B squared. So as long as I remember to put the squaring in, then I'm fine. It's the same as before. I can now write A is equal to some value K times by B squared. And again, as long as I remember to put the squaring in, I'm fine. I'm now going to substitute in the values I've been given. So I'm going to pop a 5 down is equal to K times 4 squared. You've got to remember to do the 4 squared. Okay, now, so it's going to be K times 4 squared. 4 squared is 16. So you can, if you're confident with it, just write 16K straight away. So 5 is equal to 16K. Solve for K, divide both sides by 16. And I've now got enough for my formula. Lots of people do it right till this point and then forget the squared. So you've got to remember you still need it in there. So my formula is A is equal to 5/16 of B squared. Remember to keep the squaring in. And if you ever have to use that formula, make sure you keep the B squaring in and remember to do the squaring. As long as you do that, you've just got one additional level of thinking to put into the questions and you will be fine. Okay, here's another one. Okay, so see if you can find the little extra that I've put in there that makes this question more complicated. Okay, so the extra thing that I've added into this question is the fact I'm talking about cube root. Okay, so instead of thinking about n on its own, I'm always going to be thinking instead about the cube root of n. Okay, so whenever I see an n, it's going to have that cube root with it. So I've got them varying directly, which you might remember is another word for direct proportion. So I can say that m is directly proportional to the cube root of n. As long as I remember to pop it in there, I'll be fine. Therefore, m is equal to some value k times the cube root of n. I'm then going to put the pair of values that I was given in. Some value k times the cube root of 27. The cube root of 27 is 3, so 2 is equal to 3k. Divide both sides by 3. 2/3 is my k value. You could write it as 0.6 recurring, as long as you remember the recurring dot, but that's probably a bit more complicated than just writing it as a fraction. You can do whichever one works best for you. I've got to put it back into my formula, remembering that I've still got that cube root involved. So m is equal to either 2/3 cube root of n, or m is equal to 2 cube root n all over 3, whichever way of writing it you prefer. Okay, so it's your turn now. Have a go at these two questions and make sure you pay really close attention to every single word in the question too. Okay, then here are the answers. And again, it's really important when we go through these, be watching out for the line by line method so you've got a sense of what you need to show in an exam situation. So for the orange question, the words to really notice here are cube of t. Okay, so that means we're dealing with t cubed rather than just t. So we can say, first of all, that r is directly proportional to t cubed using the symbol. That means that r is equal to some constant k times by t cubed. We can then put in the pair of values we were given in the question, and we can divide both sides by 8 to solve for k. And because we're dealing with eighths, you might also want to give it as a decimal instead, whichever one you feel more comfortable with. And then just make sure at the end of all of that, you put your k value back into the original form of the equation that you created to get a final formula that links r and t together. Here is the solution for the purple one. So this time, the bit that we need to be watching out for is the bit that says square root of f. So f is always appearing with a square root. So we can say that g is proportional to the square root of f. Therefore, g is equal to some value k times root f. And then we can substitute in the two values, the 4 and the 25, but make sure we're putting that 25 inside the square root, which makes it a 5. So 4 is equal to 5k. Divide both sides by 5 to solve for k, and you can either work with the fraction 4/5, or if you prefer, you can use the decimal. Both are correct and will get you full marks. So that means we get the formula either g equals 0.8 root f or g equals 4 root f over 5. Okay, so here is an AQA GCSE exam style question on trickier proportional relationships. So talk to the person next to you, try and record down the same as you would in an exam and try and see if you can capture all 3 marks. Roughly every 30 seconds, I'm going to give you a hint and then I will show you the mark scheme. Okay, so here is the answer. You might have found that a lot more difficult if you didn't have a calculator with you, but I expect you managed to get part of the way along with it anyway. Here is the mark scheme. So talk to the person next to you and see how many of those marks you think you might have got.